So when you're thinking electricity, what is the first word that comes to your mind? For me, it's zap. I am not an electrician, so therefore whenever I have to do any electrical work, first thing I do is go to the panel and switch off the breaker. I think electricity is not generally understood by many people. So when you're buying a house, for example, the last thing you want to do is get zapped by an electrical system. So let's listen to Mike Asselin, a home inspector with Inspect Canada, and let's listen to what he has to say about electrical systems.
Prior to 1950, we had nub and tubes. Nub and tubes was the original type of wiring for houses. When it started, it was nub and tube. And then there's a few problems with that. So nub and tube, because it hasn't been used after 1950, the insurance companies, they think that it's getting pretty old. And then also along the way, it has been modified many times. So nub and tubes pretty much looks like that. So this is a tube where the line, this is the original old wiring right there. It goes through a tube because this had to go through the framing. So when it goes through the framing, they poke a hole, they stick that tube in there, then they run the wiring through the framing like this. Now when it needs to go around a corner, there's a nub like this. I'm missing a little piece here, but this kind of stabs into a stud and then it anchors like that. And then basically that's what nub and tube is. It basically runs like that. So if you go in the utility room, you got an old house, 1943 or 1912, whatever it is, go in the utility room. Normally the ceiling is wide open in there. And if you see any of this white ceramic kind of stuff, then the house had nub and tube at one point. Now it is possible that they fully upgraded it and normally they don't pull it out, they just leave it there, and that it's not live. So that is to be verified. But normally, even when owners have paid an electrical companies to go through the house and remove all this stuff, there's always a little bit left for some reason. Like we find them in the attic and places where they think they'll get away with it and stuff. So this is called nub and tube. So the problem with nub and tube is a few things. Here, I don't know if you guys want to. Anyway, this basically looks like that. So the problem with nub and tube is because it hasn't been used since 1950, insurance companies are like, man, this is way too old. The earliest, the youngest one will be at least 75 years old, and then it could be over 100 years. So they realize that the rats may have chewed on it a few times along the year. Electricians may have modified it. We go in the attic, they kind of splice it with tape on this thing with newer stuff. They're basically thinking it's dangerous. Not only that, it's also a non-grounded system. Nowadays, every wire comes with 3 wires, a hot, a neutral, and a ground. The ground is designed so if there's a problem, instead of getting the power to go through your body, because you're touching ground, it'll go through the ground. Now, if there's no ground, it's dangerous for you to get a shock and maybe die out of it. So the insurance, they're like, well, you know what, that's getting pretty old. We would prefer that you replace it. So it's not the end of the world, though. There are solutions for that. Very often, the outlets you have in the bathroom, the GFCI outlet, they got these little reset buttons on them. You could install that where the old outlets are. So if there's a problem and instead of the power running through you, they'll pop the outlet just like it would in the bathroom. And the insurance company, they're okay with that. So because, removing all this stuff can be pretty pricey, but not only that, it's normally in houses that has asbestos in the drywall and in the floor and in the ceiling and all kinds of stuff like that. So whenever they want to start cutting walls open to replace it, you got to deal with all that extra stuff. So in most cases, it's best just to replace the outlet. Okay, now fuses. I'm sure you don't see them very often. I normally see them in Westminster, old buildings in Westminster, these big concrete high-rises, or in the Brentwood area, the old concrete high-rises will have fuses. So these are basically the electrical panel that came in once nub and tube came along. So basically these fuses, the problem with fuses is that it's like a light bulb. Nowadays we have breakers. So if there's a problem with the electrical, poof, breaker trips. All you need to do is go push that breaker back in there and you're back in business. Now when a fuse trip, it's burnt. It's like a burnt light bulb. It's no longer usable. You gotta unscrew it there and throw another one. So very often if something had a problem and it kept popping and the guy gets tired to going to Home Depot and and now it's hard to find these things too, right? So so what someone could do, because if you look at it, this is like a breaker. This is a 15 amp breaker. There might be some 20 or some 30. So if this 15 keeps tripping, Someone just say, I'll just put a 20 in there and it'll stop tripping. But the thing is, a breaker is designed to save the wire. So if there's a breaker here and a wire and there's too much current going through this wire, poof, it's designed to trip before it lights up on fire. Now, if the breaker is bigger than what it's allowed, it will fry before it trips. So the insurance company realized that this is a problem. And also, if you get tired of this, you unscrew it, you put a penny. If you find yourself a penny, you throw a penny in there, it bypasses everything and you don't need a fuse. So the insurance company realized that people's been tampering with this. It's not great. And also in most cases, it's only a 60 amp panel, which is not quite enough for today. But we'll talk about that here. And really, a panel upgrade is not the end of the world. It's in the $3,000 kind of range, depending on where it is and how high it's set up and all of that. So, all right, so now between 1950 and 1965, and this is all in your chart when you look at this with these dates there basically. During those times, we had a lot of 60 amp panels, which was perfectly fine for a lot of those older houses because a lot of them would be using a wood-burning fireplace to heat up the place. It didn't need a whole lot of power. It didn't even have dishwashers. It would dry up their clothes outside. So it was mostly switches and outlet, which is fine with 60 amp. But nowadays, everybody's got a computer, and then we're using so much more power. Now we got dryers, they use 30 amp breakers. We got stoves, they use 40 amp breakers. So if you got 60, it's just not quite enough. So the insurance company, not big fans of that because they're thinking people will overload them and they could kind of melt and do kind of have electrical issues. So if you go to a high, now this, a 60 amp panel, I should add though that it is fine to be in a condo and a townhouse. Insurance company will be okay with this. But for a detached home, that is kind of past due. So if you're going downstairs, you move the panel, you look, it says 60 amp on the main breaker. Tell your clients you will likely have to upgrade your panel. This is not enough power right here. And again, it's roughly about in the $3,000 range to replace that, depending where it's located and how far it is from the main source, basically. So again, this is an upgrade. Same thing with the panel from earlier. If you see one of those in a condo, again, not the end of the world, but on a detached house, the insurance company will either be very expensive or they'll say, we're not insuring you. Okay? All right, so between 65 and 72, and it actually goes, I've seen it the other day until 1974. That's aluminum wiring. So during that time frame there, aluminum, the price of copper went up like crazy. I think there was a war or whatever it was, and they started using aluminum wiring. And it was not that bad of a product. It's just that when you use it, it heats up and it expands. When you stop using it, it cools down and it retracts. And every time you do this, eventually it can get loose in these outlets. And if it gets loose, it can start arcing. And then it can start a fire. I mean, personally, doing a lot of inspections with aluminum wiring, I've never really seen any problem, but it's mostly an insurance kind of issue. So now this will be hard for you to see, but if it's a place that is built between 65 and 72 and you go on the exterior wall of that house, in the interior, but on the outside walls, and you see they're all original outlets and stuff like that, likely it's aluminum wiring in there. Now, luckily, there is a great solution for that, and it's called pigtailing. So what pigtailing is, it's basically the insurance company don't want this aluminum wiring to reach out to your outlet. They don't want it to touch your outlet. So you take these wires out of your outlet, you add a piece of copper to it, you twist with a little twist up, you put a copper to it, and now you have a copper connection to your outlet. So it's going from aluminum to copper to your outlet, and that's called pigtailing. And the insurance, so far, they're perfectly fine with that. So if you find this in a house, normally houses that has aluminum wiring from that age range didn't have that many outlets. Now we got an outlet every 8 feet or so. In the past, you had one per room or whatever it is, right? So on these houses, you might have 20 outlets, and the electrician will roughly charge you about 50 to 75 bucks per outlet. They'll replace the outlet and pigtail them all. So we're talking about something under $1,000. So it's not the end of the world. So if your client's concerned with that, you can tell him all the time, look, there's pigtailing out there, and the insurance company will be okay with that. It doesn't change the fact that you're still stuck with very old wiring, but if we just want to deal with the insurance company and make sure that you get insurance and it's not overly priced, pigtailing is the solution. Now between 71 and 87, so these are the GFCI outlets. So a GFCI outlet is not the end of the world because it's a pretty easy repair right there. So GFI outlets, they're basically, it means ground fault circuit interrupter. And what it does, it's basically any outlet that is within 1.5 meter of a water source, like in the bathroom, in the kitchen, or on the exterior, should be GFCI protected. And the whole idea, again, is that if, let's say in the bathroom, you got your hair dryer, you got your water running and stuff, and then you drop your hair dryer in the sink, you pick it up. Being a regular outlet, it could really get a massive shock, and some people would die out of that. With this here, the power pops. Poof, power is gone. All you need to do is push that button. So it came into code in around these time range right there, in the kitchen in 1987. But there's a lot. Yesterday I did a place from 2006, and the outlets were not GFCI protected in the kitchen. So, you know, and again, it's not the end of the world, because you don't need to bring any new wiring or anything like this. All you do is you take the old outlet, it's got 3 wires, and you plug it the exact same way in a GFCI outlet that is roughly about $20 at Home Depot. So this normally in the kitchen and in the bathroom, it's nice. It's not a deal killer. Nobody's will not buy a house because the outlet is not GFCI protected. But if you're going to go to a showing and you notice that none of the outlets in the kitchen have these, you might let your client know, and you will look like you know your stuff as well, that nowadays these outlets are protected for your safety. And if they're going to use it as a rental, even more important, you get a renter hurt them themselves, they get so happy, right?